We've all heard about powerful corporations that have shaped world history, but did you know one of the first corporations was so influential that it practically controlled entire nations? This is the tale of the Dutch East India Company, arguably the most successful corporation in history. At its height, this company was valued at $7.9 trillion. In today's terms, that's more than Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined. How did this company change the world and transform the tiny European nation of the Netherlands into a global superpower? And why did it ultimately collapse? Was it overexpansion, corruption, or perhaps, like many powerful empires, the seeds of its own destruction were planted at its peak? Let's find out. Can you believe that the Netherlands, now one of Europe's wealthiest and most influential economic centers, was far from prosperous in the 16th century? At that time, it wasn't even independent, instead finding itself under the rule of the powerful Spanish Empire. This empire, which amassed its wealth through conquest, slavery, and global trade, dominated Europe and the Americas. The Dutch, however, were locked in an 80-year struggle for independence. For the Dutch, this battle wasn't just about political and religious freedom, it was also about breaking free from economic constraints. As a seafaring nation, the Dutch economy thrived on shipping, fishing, and especially the spice trade. Lacking colonies of their own, they relied on buying spices from Lisbon, Portugal, and distributing them across Europe. But in 1580, when Portugal was absorbed into the Spanish Empire, Spain swiftly cut off the Dutch from these vital trade routes, threatening to choke their economy. In response, Dutch merchants faced a critical choice: either wither under Spanish control or sail to the Far East themselves and build their own trade routes. Thus began one of the most daring ventures in business history, although the early days were anything but smooth. At first, individual Dutch merchants and cities funded expeditions to the Far East. They sent ships to chart new trade routes, hoping to strike gold, or in this case, spices. But these expeditions were filled with danger. Between 1595 and 1601, the Dutch sent out 65 ships on various voyages. The results? 1 in 10 ships never returned, and of those that did, only about a third of their crews survived. The early spice trade was a perilous business. However, those expeditions that succeeded brought back vast quantities of spices, sparking interest and fueling further voyages. Slowly but surely, the Dutch gained valuable knowledge about the Far East, and it became clear that if they wanted to compete with the Portuguese and Spanish, they needed to unify. So, in 1602, the Dutch Republic took a revolutionary step. Instead of having individual merchants compete with one another, the government decided to unite them under one banner. With the blessing of the Dutch government, the merchants formed the United East India Company, also known as the VOC, or the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. This was no ordinary company. It was granted almost sovereign powers. The VOC could raise armies, wage wars, negotiate treaties, occupy land, and even enslave populations. In essence, it was a corporation with powers of a nation-state. It had a monopoly on all Dutch trade with Asia, and its mission was clear: dominate the spice trade and enrich the Dutch Republic. To fund its ambitious ventures, the VOC pioneered a financial innovation that would go on to become the backbone of modern capitalism, the stock market. In the center of Amsterdam, the VOC set up a trading house where ordinary Dutch citizens could invest in the company. In exchange for their money, they were given shares of the VOC and a promise of future profits. This was groundbreaking. The VOC became the world's first publicly traded company, raising over 6 million guilders, around $110 million today, in its initial public offering. This influx of capital allowed the company to build a fleet of ships, raise armies, and establish trading posts throughout Asia. With its vast resources, the VOC quickly established itself as a dominant force in the spice trade. Their first major victory came in 1611, when they captured Jakarta, Indonesia, which became the VOC's headquarters in Asia. From there, the company expanded across the region, setting up factories and trade posts in India, Japan, China, and beyond. But did the VOC just trade in spices? Not at all. They also dealt in silk, porcelain, silver, and other luxury goods. Their ships sailed across the globe, monopolizing trade routes and raking in profits. At its height, the VOC's profit margins were as high as 1,500%. The Dutch Republic, which had been struggling for independence just a few decades earlier, was now one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Just like the Dutch East India Company made bold decisions to expand its empire, now's the time for you to make a smart move by hitting that subscribe button and expanding your knowledge with more stories of rise, fall, and everything in between. Don't wait, subscribe now. Although it all sounds great, the VOC's power didn't come without a cost. The company's expansion was built on violence and exploitation. In Indonesia, they slaughtered local populations and forced entire regions into severe labor to ensure a steady supply of spices. Another brutal example was the Ambonia Massacre in 1623, where VOC officials executed British and Japanese traders to assert dominance over the lucrative Spice Islands. The VOC's greed knew no bounds, and its empire was sustained through oppression. As the VOC's wealth flowed back into the Netherlands, the Dutch used it to embark on another ambitious project, land reclamation. Most of the country was below sea level, making it prone to flooding. But with the money from the VOC, the Dutch built a series of dikes and drainage systems that turned swampy areas into fertile farmland. This land reclamation transformed the Dutch landscape. The wealth generated by the VOC not only funded the Dutch War for Independence, which they finally won in 1648, but also allowed the Netherlands to become a hub of innovation, culture, and economic power. However, the VOC's influence wasn't limited to the Netherlands. Its impact was felt across the world. Many former Dutch colonies still bear the scars of the VOC's violent exploitation. But the company's influence wasn't purely negative. Cape Town, South Africa, for example, was established as a VOC supply station in 1652. No empire lasts forever, and the VOC was no exception. By the 18th century, the company's aggressive expansion and greed began to catch up with it. Several factors contributed to its downfall. Firstly, the company became bloated and inefficient. The VOC's monopoly allowed it to become complacent, and corruption seeped into its ranks. Secondly, the geopolitical landscape shifted. The Dutch Republic lost a series of disastrous wars to the British in the late 18th century. Finally, the French Revolution spelled the company's doom. In 1795, the newly formed French Republic invaded the Netherlands and established a puppet state. With the French threatening Dutch independence at home and the British attacking their colonies abroad, the VOC was left in a dicey position. In 1799, after nearly 200 years of dominance, the Dutch East India Company was formally dissolved. And that's the story of how one of the wealthiest companies in history rose to dominance and fell into oblivion. There's a lot to learn from both the rise and fall of the Dutch East India Company. It is a tale of human ingenuity as well as a warning about the destructive power of empires. One thing is clear, the VOC's legacy is as complex as it is far-reaching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Tales of Titans for more stories of history's greatest empires. Thanks for watching.